Day 312. I am still alive, but there is not a single human voice. They said this bunker was safe. They said we would leave together, but one morning the door was locked from the outside. The supplies were gone and I was left behind. This is not a story about war. This is a story about betrayal and how someone survives when the world chooses to leave without saying goodbye. My name is Ravel Arkana. Back then, I was no one important. I didn't carry a weapon, I didn't lead troops, I only repaired radios. My job was simple, listening to sounds no one else listened to, a small hum between two frequencies. Subtle interference that only appears if you are patient enough to stay silent. Every morning I left before the sun fully rose, not because of discipline, but because the morning air of Arkhavel was calmer. Radio waves were cleaner before the city fully woke up. In that small workspace I spent hours with a headset pressed to my ears. Sometimes I heard only static, sometimes fragments of strangers' sentences, sometimes the voice of someone panicking, then disappearing just like that. I was used to it. Sounds came and went. Not everyone could be helped, not everything could be answered. After work I usually didn't go straight home. I sat for a while on an old bus stop bench, tuning my small pocket radio, not for information, just to make sure. The world still had a voice. I lived simply. Not many friends, not many desires. I was more comfortable listening than speaking. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the signs, because when the voices began to change, cutting off more often, becoming more rushed, more filled with fear, I thought it was just technical interference. I noted it as usual. This frequency is unstable. That signal is weakening. Emergency messages are coming more often from the same direction. I wasn't suspicious. I was just doing my job. There was one small habit I always had. I always carried a small screwdriver in my jacket pocket, not because I needed it, just because I didn't like my hands feeling empty. I used that screwdriver for trivial things. Opening the casing of an old radio, tightening a loose bolt, or simply rolling it between my fingers while waiting. At the time, I didn't know that this small habit would later keep me sane when all other voices disappeared. On the last nights before everything changed, I often turned off my room light and sat in the dark just to listen. Not to the radio, not to the news, but to the city. Footsteps in the corridor, doors closing, distant faint laughter. I remember thinking one thing: as long as there is sound, there are still humans. I didn't know how expensive that sentence would become later. The war in Arkhavel did not begin with bombs. There were no explosions, no long sirens like in old films. The war began with a sentence that sounded reasonable. They called it a temporary relocation. Just a few days, they said, until the situation above stabilized. We were gathered in an underground facility, an old bunker left from a previous regime. They said it was safe. They said it had been inspected. I remember the faces on the first day. Not panicked, not hysterical. Some were even joking. People believe because they want to believe, because the alternative is too terrifying. The early days went by. Almost normally, we were given schedules, sleeping hours, meal times, rest periods. The community radio was still on. I was asked to help check the internal communication system. A few small disturbances, nothing critical. Then day 27 arrived without any warning. I woke up not from a nightmare, but from a sound that shouldn't exist at that hour. Heavy metal, a long, slow scrape, like something being closed carefully, deliberately. I sat up, listening. Footsteps, not rushed, not panicked, calm, organized. I stepped into the main corridor. The lights were still on, the air was still clean, but the atmosphere was empty. The main bunker, door usually guarded by two people, was now tightly shut. The access panel was dark. I pressed my ear against the door. There was no sound behind it. At that moment, I didn't think badly yet. I still believed it was a procedure. I headed to the logistics storage. My steps slowed before I reached it. Empty shelves, crates opened, not messy, clean, to be panic. The backup water tank showed 0, not broken, shut off. The main radio, the one I always called the heart of the bunker, was gone, not torn out. The cables were neatly disconnected. I stood there for a long time, not because I didn't understand what happened, but because my mind refused to arrange it. I looked for people, names I knew, faces that had eaten together just yesterday. None, no notes, no messages, no explanations. The strangest part, there were no signs of fear, no belongings left behind, no shoes, no sound of running. They didn't flee, they left with a plan. And in that moment, for the first time since entering the bunker, I felt something colder than fear. The slow realization that I was not part of anyone's plan. I knocked on the door softly at first, like someone still being polite, afraid of disturbing. Thought, maybe they forgot me. Maybe the system locked automatically. Maybe there was a procedure I didn't know. The soft knocks became punches. Punches became shoves. Shoves became clenched fists. The skin on my fingers split, but the door didn't move even a little. I shouted, called names I knew. Names that had answered greetings just yesterday. My voice echoed through the bunker corridors, returned to me weaker. I stopped shouting not because I was tired, but because of one simple realization. There was no one standing behind that door. I pressed my forehead against it. The metal was cold, stable, no vibration. The bunker wasn't collapsing, not damaged, not out of power. Emergency lights were still on. Ventilation still hummed softly. Every system worked, except humans. That was what made it cruel. If the bunker were dark, if the air were gone, if the walls were cracking, I could blame the war. But no, this place was safe, maintained, ready to be lived in. Just not for me. I walked through the corridors. The sound of my own footsteps felt foreign to clear. Too alone. Every room felt larger than it should. Not because its size changed, but because there was no one else inside it. I sat on the floor and tried to count time without a clock, without schedules, without other human voices as markers. That was when I realized something disturbing. They didn't forget me. They didn't panic. They chose that choice, closed the door. That choice emptied the storage. That choice cut my voice off from the world. The war didn't need to come into this bunker to kill me. One calm human decision was enough, and in that bright but silent space, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of never being heard again.